So is there anything you're working on or thinking about that has you excited today?
Well, I don't know about the word excited, but I guess I'm just wiring up, finishing up the gray wolf. So,
Similar avionics as the Blue Northern?
yeah, pretty similar, just better, you know, after you've been in some of those situations, then you think about, well, what if this happened or what if you needed to do this? So probably the biggest change in the avionics is the gray wolf will fly without electricity. So, the road taxis power their ignition, and since the engine is based off of a road tax, its ignition is, self-contained. But if you lost both alternators, for instance, you know, which isn't going to happen per se, you might not want to use any alternator. I can see situations in really, really remote country where you could want to not have any electricity. And then how would you get the airplane out? So if something got damaged, so I've pretty well ruled out rodents, but early on in the process, that's something you really got to think about. If you know anything about anything, you know that a shrew or a mouse or a rat is,
Can make for a long day.
yeah, well, they've killed a lot of men, that's for sure.
Right.
So they just love wiring. So, and sometimes I think they're just doing it to sharpen their teeth, but they sure attack it. So rodents can't really get in, the way it's set up. And if you think about kind of where you park it in a remote country, but for whatever reason, things that are beyond your control and just those, 1 in a million chances, you've got an issue with the wiring that you're not going to trace out. Maybe you don't have time, whatever it is. And you don't want to individually pull breakers and shut off power paths. So like, let's say if you get a short on a component, okay, you lost that component. But for whatever reason, what if you fundamentally did not want to have any electricity coming from the engine? And, we have 2 alternators. So you're going to shut off both alternators and you're just going to run on, let's say, a battery or your solar battery. So obviously you need some electricity, but could it run without essentially any? I mean, you got to power a fuel pump and stuff like that to where it could even fly without any avionics. So, and there have been a couple of situations where I can see that would have been handy, because there's a lot of issues that if you can shut down the electrical system, suddenly aren't issues anymore. If you can just not power up the electrical. So, I'm not going to go into too much detail on a specific, any specific examples, but there's a lot of situations where if it can be done safely, and I'm making it to where it can, it might even be smarter to just say, you know what, I don't know. I can't, but the point is something's happened and you need to get this plane out and all your stuff, someplace really remote. You don't want to be dependent on electricity. If you can build it to where that you don't have to use the aircraft's electrical system, then to get it out, that could be very handy to where you might just want to do it anyways. The most realistic example that I've thought of is some type of water. So let's say, for instance, that, for whatever reason, you or somebody, something flooded, or you overlanded and you wound up in the water. I mean, you can look on the internet and you've seen this happen. The plane is 100% flyable. And they have to sit there and dry out for 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. If it's a real hot sunny day, maybe a day. But, fastest thing you can do is, the only way this plane's getting hurt is if stuff starts shorting out and frying. you know, and arcing. So if you get the electrical system shut off and keep it off, you know,
Save it.
it's just water. So if for whatever reason you got water up inside, you know, the cabin, well, that plane is probably toast, even though nothing was wrong with it. It's not hurt mechanically, but electrically, you fire that thing up and, you know, you could hurt its main electrical system. And so rather than just having to cross your fingers and, okay, I hope everything dried out in time,
Right.
you know, you don't have to. You can just keep the alternators off, keep the electrical system off. You're going to need to start it off the battery, but that's simple. You know, it's a positive and negative. And then just to have, you know, a very simple, crude, something that water actually wouldn't bother, like the fuel pump, and your prop, you know, and so you can manipulate that a little, or you can leave it fixed, and your ECU, and then just having more, a little bit more rugged and robust redundant paths on the for the aircraft for the ECU, the prop, and the fuel pumps for really heavy IFR. So if something were to happen in IFR and you lost all your electrical power, it wouldn't be, you know, wouldn't be the end of the world. The plane would still fly, and you know, you'd have, in this case now, 3 different backup powers for your essential avionics and stuff. So yeah, it's just the electrical system, because electricity by nature is somewhat delicate, is more robust for places like what we've been in.
Right.
To where one thing's, you know, there's just fewer one things that are going to shut you down. So now you can just load up and you fly it out, you know, just VFR, but you can just keep everything offline, keep it isolated, and you can figure out if it's dry enough or if anything got hurt later.
Right. Yeah.
So that's one I've seen happen where, you know, on videos, and then I heard stories where it's just like, yeah, that would, you know, because nothing in the aircraft necessarily got hurt. A lot of times they just flipped it right side up, and, you know, and you can fly it out of there. So.
Right. Right. And how do you use solar in the plane and for some of the accessories that we have?
It
filming and
charges essentially a backup battery, but it's isolated. So, and I'm toying with the idea of integrating a switch to bring it immediately online. But as it is right now, for various reasons, I like to have to, you know, to manually have to hook it up. But it's a really high capacity backup battery system. So you could fly the airplane off of it if you needed to. Or you could, you know, remove it from its compartment. You could jump the aircraft off of it. That could be easily. So that gives you another way to start the aircraft. If you have the aircraft's battery has issues, you can run everything, you know, even indefinitely off of the solar deal. And then it gives you a, you know, good amount of reserve electricity. You could power a hot wire fence. And you know, with some real zap to it.
Right. Keep it bears off a plane or something
and
like
power
that.
it for days. So the aircraft could power its own hot wire system if you
Wow.
wanted to haul it. Obviously, keeping all of the stuff charged. You know, that's how we kept it all charged.
Right.
Yeah, it's a neat thought. I don't think it would really work in practice, but I mean, I guess I've done it once just to prove it. But it can, on a bright sunny day, especially when you're above the clouds, you know, if the sun is kind of between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock in the day, it'll run. You know, the solar system itself, without any drain, will run the whole aircraft. But so it gives you another, you know, especially if that's put on a switch, that gives you another, even without solar, 2 or 3 hours. So you don't, you know, you could run without an alternator.
Right.
For 2 or 3 hours, which is pretty handy. But if it was sunny, you could run without an alternator an alternator for probably 6, 7, 8 hours.
With storage.
And it's, you know, initially you might think, well, why would you ever need to do that? Well, I don't know.
Right.
It's probably not going to be good if you need to, but there are certain situations where you might need to.
Right.
Voltage regulator. So we have 2 of them. You know, each alternator is independently regulated, but with all of our technology, that's a bit of a weak link is a voltage regulator. Certain things, when they go, they're gone.
Right.
One of those things, you know, they're pretty expensive, especially the ones that, you know, we're using. We have Ducatis, but you know, even race cars have a couple of different ones of those for that reason, because if that goes, it's gone.
Right.
So you just shut it off and use the other one. We've got that too, but if something took out, rather than just natural attrition, took out one of the voltage regulators, if you didn't have both your voltage regulators, that is a scenario where you would want yet another one, no electricity coming out of the alternators, because you can't regulate it. So, all right, you got an electrical problem and you've got over voltage protection and stuff like that. Well, if you force that thing to fly, or if it does get past your over voltage protection, you're going to fry everything you got in that plane. So, you know, don't even test those checks and balances. You just keep the electricity off,
Right.
coming out of the alternators, until you can get somewhere where you can replace it or, you know, fix it, whatever's wrong.
Right.
Well, if that happens to happen out in the middle of nowhere, typically when it happens to somebody, they're a long ways from home and they wind up, you know, renting a car and driving home,
Right.
you know, or staying in a hotel for a couple of days while they overnight a new regulator. We can't do that out there.
Right.
So, you know, we got 2 of them, but so you can shut off the one that's causing issues. But if you need to fly for an hour to get out of something, I wanted the plane to be able to do that.
Right.
So that's one of the things that's pretty different, and that forces you to rewire lots of different stuff in the avionics.
Right. So thinking of contingencies and what your infrastructure is.
Yeah. And I'm putting in the wiring for above ground radar on the Gray Wolf. I think that'd be pretty handy. Out in the boonies, it'd be
Right.
extremely handy.
Wow. Wasn't that many years ago that only the upper echelon of aviation had that tool.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's pretty cool
Yeah.
to be able to see out.
Yeah, I mean, the military choppers have had that above ground radar for a while, and I think then somebody decided to bring it into civilian helicopters, but really fairly recently. And then somebody got the bright idea, Garmin, that'd be awfully handy on small aircraft.
Right.
So we'll offer that, because it is, especially in mountainous and unfamiliar terrain. It's just going to give you a constant, anybody that's ever done any fishing, you know, it's just going to, like a downward transducer, and you're going to be mapping out everything underneath you, and you can see trends, you know. So suddenly it's almost like a new, you know, tool that in darkness, or, you know, you think you're somewhere here and you're just such a gigantic idiot that you can't look at the synthetic vision on the screen. It's another cross-reference tool you can see rising terrain right underneath you. And, you know, so it kicks on, and then for landing, boy, what a trick to learn how to land with, because you can work your flare at different altitudes, and it'll be different at different altitudes, but you can learn, and at a given indicated airspeed, your flare will be at the exact same altitude every single landing, every single time, and it's going to work out, you know, and you won't have to worry about your depth perception of being a little bit off that day because of the sun or something like that, because at that point it's all eyeballs, and some of them you just nail, and some of them you're like, just flared too soon, but it looked right, you know, it just wasn't, or it felt right, and that was the wind and something, or a gust, or, you know, the gust. So that, you know, being able to tell down to the very foot that you're off the ground. You can flare right at 5 feet or 6 feet or whatever it is you do.
Right.
Be handy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's great that Garmin has seen what's happening elsewhere in the aviation world, helicopter world, and then to be able to incorporate it
Yeah.
in the private aviation.
Yeah. So.
And probably not a lot of folks in the experimental world are utilizing that feature, are they?
I don't know. I've not heard of any, but
Right.
I can't imagine they wouldn't be. It's kind of a no-brainer. So I'm sure they are. I just haven't heard anybody, but I'm probably not the guy to ask.
Right. Any other things as you kind of going through the process and working on this one that you're thinking about?
No, it's pretty much just getting it finished up with the wiring and stuff. Other than that, it's just trying to keep chickens alive. Those darn coyotes.
Yeah, it is. It's the fun part of living in West Texas, though, that you are out among the wildlife, and it reminds you that
Yeah.
there is a world out there where it's predators and prey, and it goes on every day.
Well, coyotes are just so smart. It's really annoying when they get smug about it, and so if you really want to keep them off, trapping's the only way to really do that.
Yeah.
And I didn't have time to do it this year, but
Right.
first year I lived here, March to March, I killed 28.
Oh.
I took 28 off of an area probably 30 acres in size.
Wow.
And so obviously there weren't that many coyotes living there, but it just
Right.
became a sinkhole, and I was just pulling them from all around. And my chickens were safe then, but
Wow.
it's a lot of work to kill that many of them.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. So you were baiting them and trapping them,
Yeah.
and because you probably didn't do a lot of calling, did you,
No.
to take them out that way?
No, you won't hardly get any.
Right.
In terms of the overall population. Predator hunting doesn't really
Right.
cull them down that much. You'll probably get about 10%. So if I'd called, I probably could have called in two or three
Right.
and killed them. And I did. I guess I might have called one. I howled her in, I think, that year. I'll do that every now and then during the mating season.
Right. Right. Speaking of which,
Yeah, it was
we're
February.
Here. Yeah, it's last
I
month.
heard one this morning.
Did you?
Yeah, that male, I'm guessing was hers.
Right.
So it shot him like 5-6 days ago. This time of year, I know he's got a female somewhere.
Yeah.
And if not two of them. And I heard her hollering this morning down the draw, so I'm betting.
Right.
He was like, okay, it's been 4 or 5 days now. You were supposed to come back with that chicken.
Yeah.
Where you at? So.
Yeah. Holding him accountable.
Well, I guess she was just doing the mating howl that they do.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, they are prolific. And yeah, it's really remarkable the impact they have on deer and
Yeah, my dad put a bounty on them on his place for all of us, and it's pretty substantial now. I'd like to get over there and get some of his. So
Right.
they don't have a predatory coyote problem at all because he just puts a bounty. So every single time the brother-in-laws or any of my brothers go over there, and my mom learned how to prep, which is fairly difficult to properly prep the traps. So she's got her own set. So, setting them takes some skill, but prepping them does too. And so now when I show up or Jordan shows up or any of the brother-in-laws show up, we can just
Be ready.
She said, "Hey, you wanna?
Right.
I'll make you something special. You want to go out and set me 2 or 3 traps?" So
Yeah.
they kill a lot of coyotes on his ranch like that, and
That is wise.
I think it's been making a really big difference. And they started hitting it really hard a couple of years ago.
Did they have a problem with their cattle?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't. I mean, even one cow's expensive nowadays.
is.
You're talking thousands of dollars. I
Right.
don't think anyone sells a cow for less than a calf, even for less than $1,000.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
so if it got one of your heifers, what's she going to be worth over
Right.
her
What do you have
lifetime?
invested in her?
So I don't know that he lost, more than one or two. I think he had to put one down, and they had just eaten on him, but they'd left him alive, which they do a lot.
Right.
So, I mean, he didn't have a leg, so they
Yeah.
had to shoot him.
And as you know, come calving season, I mean, when they're at their most vulnerable, coyotes understand. They pay
Yeah.
attention.
Yeah, it definitely has boosted his deer. I remember in one draw in his place, I found a spot, and there was probably about 4 fawn skulls. And the skeletons, on those fawns, I think they probably eat the bones. They're soft enough, but the skulls will always hang around.
Right.
And it was just in this one little area, and I don't know if the coyote, it was probably his spot, was dragging him there or something. But there was 4 skulls there, and I had happened to find a couple other that day, and they were all from that year.
Man.
And so that year, that you just happened to stumble across,
Right.
that had been chewed up
Yeah.
and eaten. And Randy Anderson, he made just tons of these DVDs,
Right.
and when I was a kid, wound up being really famous, and he's a really neat guy.
Yeah.
But one time on one of his episodes, it was during the mating season, and it was past the mating season, it was in the pupping season, and they were depredating these coyotes, and they shot a male-female pair, and they had a den with pups, and they could tell by the way the coyotes were acting, they had a general idea, and they had these dogs, and these dogs killed all the pups, before they even got over there, and they realized what the dogs were into.
Right.
But in that den were 13, and around it, the pups, 13 fawn skulls.
I've heard that story, and I've seen Randy Anderson. I mean, he's a neat guy, and
It was a big.
That's amazing.
They were mule deer in this case,
Wow.
and it was a. I think I've got that right. There's a couple of them, but I just remember on one of his episodes that this one den had 13.
like a psychopath
Fawn
that
skulls.
he enjoys keeping.
Well, I think that's just the moms
Yeah.
and dads dragging back the meat, and that's the one thing that they always leave is the skulls. I mean, I think
Can't do anything with them.
that and the spinal column, but on the fawns, they typically, I think they're eating
Right.
they just typically leave these skulls, so that's the only indication you have that there was really anything there, and the hooves sometimes, but sometimes they even get the hooves on the fawns. I think they're just soft.
Right. Right.
So that's one pair of coyotes that year that took out 13,
It's amazing.
and whoever owned that property, I bet that got their attention.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, anybody who's been around ranching and barbed wire has found deer that get into barbed wire, and typically young deer, and to see what coyotes do to them, you wouldn't want to see that. But you see what's left over, and I mean, it's brutal.
Yeah, I think it makes a bigger difference than the biologists want you to believe when you get rid of them.
Right.
And knock them back. And I used to, I went to a course that some government guys put on that my grandpa took me to. It's like a little one week course, and I learned an awful lot about lions, the cats, like the bobcats, and the lynx even. But mostly I focused on, because you could kind of tailor it, is I wanted to just deal with the government guys, which they don't even have really anymore. They're banned in New Mexico. They did away with all their lion depredation stuff.
Wow.
So this was before they'd done all that. So the guys on the lions were New Mexico ADC, Animal Damage Control guys, and then bobcats and then the coyotes. And I learned a lot about. One thing I've observed too on my dad's ranch is you don't have to get them all to be really effective. You can even scale back their destruction on the deer herd because it takes a certain amount of boldness. They have to get really comfortable. So when they come into a new area and they decide, hey, there's room for me here, and they're going off all those territorial markers when they're looking for a home, you know. And so you take advantage of that in the trapping, you know, with scent post markers and stuff. But when they come into an area, this is just my observation, but through personal experience, but I've found it to be pretty accurate. It takes them about a month to get comfortable enough to start working on chickens or your pets or dogs or something like that. Really, no matter how hungry they are, they need to feel like they own that area, that territory. And it takes them the better part of a month. It takes them the better part of about 6 months to work up to killing deer and calves. And they just won't come in out of nowhere and do it.
Confident thing. Almost.
Yeah, and a territorial thing because it's like, hey, does this belong to somebody? I mean, they'll fight, you know, very similar to wolves over, you know, it's not the territory so much, it's the stuff that lives there, you know, that they tend to fight over. And the more wildlife you have, the smaller that predatory territory is. And so when you come in and you kill, you knock off the most bold and the most confident ones, which they're the easiest to kill, fortunately. But even when they start disappearing, you'll notice an almost immediate, like, ooh, you know, Fred's gone. What happened to Fred? And then you kind of get this perfect storm rolling where, let's say you used to have, like, I don't know how many we've taken off our dad's place, but when I killed those 28, you know, and all those traps were sitting on basically probably around 20 acres. And over that year, it was probably, I saw the effects of that for almost 4 years.
Wow.
Because they are, then it's like coming into a ghost town. So now if you trap, if you can shoot a long ways and you pair it with trapping and long range shooting, because eventually they're going to get so skittish because, you know, they're like the Lone Ranger, they're the last one, that you'll polish those off just by general observation. You just get a good long range rifle, and when the conditions are right and you think he's somewhere in this area, give out a good long howl and he's going to stand up and look over at you, and he'll be somewhere between 200 and maybe 600 yards. And that's your shot. You know, he's not going to do anything because he just doesn't trust the world.
Right.
And you can get them all. And if you ever get them all, or even get close to getting them all, when a new coyote comes in and he's not smelling any territory markers, what he wants is to smell very, very few.
Right.
And to not have some big old alpha male or somewhere in there. Then that makes him really nervous because, you know, hey, this is kind of his stuff. He's doing all the killing and stuff. I should probably be careful. When you get them all like that, though, it'd be like a person like us. If you turn down a street in a city and suddenly there's not a soul. I mean, no one.
Right.
And you're just like, maybe I shouldn't be here.
Exactly. It's spooky.
What's going on? Right. Because there should be people here. This is wonderful. Look at all these stores. Such great things, and not a single person in sight. I'm going to leave too. And my observation is that is exactly the reaction those coyotes have. And when they come across your land then, and they just smell this blatant lack of their fellow kind and predators of any kind, they become extremely nervous. And they behave, and typically they'll just move through your land and pass on. And that will kind of they seem to remember that too. They're kind of like, okay, something made everybody disappear.
Right.
And you can kind of get your own little storm, psychological storm rolling with them.
Yeah.
But that smugness and that brazenness comes from them being so confident, just like I'm missing two. So
Are you really?
yeah, I was telling you, I know good and well
12 to 10?
that coyote had done that before.
Been working
Well, you could just tell by his body language
Right.
that he was expecting success. He wasn't trying to see if it would work.
Right.
That's a different. I've seen him act. That's different.
Right.
And they're extremely hesitant how they come in, and they'll do a lot of, well, I'll just come up this close and see what happens.
Yeah.
And they listen a lot too. And so for him to hear all that activity, because they can hear you in your house, and that's why when you go on vacation, all of a sudden, you know, they know it.
Right.
And so with all that activity, that was experience.
Right.
So he knew that, he believed that he would be A-okay. And for whatever reason, he thought, you know, at that distance, you know, 70 yards,
Right.
that he was fine. And he'd clearly been shot at before, and he's older though. But you can tell by their reaction to a gunshot if they've been shot at before.
Did he hunker down when?
No, so they all have this instinctual duck or jump depending on where they hear,
Right.
you know, the bullet. And typically they react to the bullet impact more than the source of the shot itself, and unless they happen to be looking at you. And so when he saw me, he didn't bolt for his life. He seemed to felt like there was nothing much to do. But when the gunshot went off, typically you look for just absolute confusement. I mean, yeah, they're getting out of Dodge, but they are just like, what was that? When they've been shot at before, which I've really only seen 2 or 3 times, it's the same way with a wild dog. I mean, they are head down, like there's no confusion.
Right.
They know, you know, and typically it's more of a giveaway when they've been grazed or peppered or something.
Right.
So, you know, but by the third shot, which is the one that got him, I could have used probably another 18 inches of lead. But I was leading him by 5 feet, but he was giving it just about all he had then. But it took a shot or two before he took it seriously. So that's pretty smug.
I haven't studied it. We've all seen the public relations programs of the wolves and the impact
Oh, man.
that the
that
state
one.
legislature and stuff.
Yeah.
Coyotes don't seem to have quite as good a PR program, fortunately, because they're straight up killers.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not aware of states. I mean,
Well, it's just politics.
You're right, it is.
Somehow the wolf seemed to be more romantic. I mean, if
Right.
the libtards ever woke up and realized that coyotes are just prairie wolves, I'm sure then it would,
Right.
you know,
they are.
the unsung heroes of the prairie or some crap like that. The biologists are duped into believing that they're a very necessary component for, you know, healthy,
Balance.
rigorous wildlife. Yeah, you can just go back to the pioneer days for that. Now,
Right.
what's funny is coyotes were almost unheard of.
And this country
Oh,
obviously
yeah.
had wolves.
You would remember that. Yeah.
Right.
Well, you would remember, though, that coyote, to even see a coyote in the 60s, probably even in Kansas, that should have been a fairly rare deal. My grandpa said that he never saw a single coyote until he was in his early 30s.
Wow. Wow.
And
Yeah.
and it was one.
Yeah.
And it was something you went down to the coffee shop and you talked about.
Right.
And now, he didn't see any because the pioneers, what little there were, trapped them all out.
Right. Right.
And, you know, and then suddenly they get all these deer out of nowhere,
Right.
too, because the pioneers, you know,
Right.
they
In the
instituted
late
fish and game
70s and
laws.
early 80s in Kansas, that's when they introduced the greyhounds, and that was
Yeah.
pure recreation
Yeah.
and craziness. But
Yeah.
they like to chase some coyotes.
And so, yes. And so, like, because I was taught that in college too, that they're this necessary, and they're like anything in the absolute natural wild, which we don't have anywhere in the lower 48,
Right.
except some really, you know, sparse areas. And what's funny is when you go to those, there's no coyotes hardly. And that's about like it was in the pioneer days.
Right.
You know, what we have nowadays almost everywhere is an absolute artificial high, hundreds of percent, and it's sustained by livestock,
Right.
agriculture. You know, the
Yeah.
rodent population from agriculture, just like we have an insanely artificially high avian predator
That's exactly what I
population
was going to mention.
that has
We do.
been, yeah, I mean by, you know, hundreds of percent, many fold
I go to our
higher
place.
than what
I mean,
would
I
be
instantly
natural.
see hawks, and you see the quail darting around.
Yeah. Well,
trying to
anybody
get
that's
under
plowed a
tree.
field,
Right.
you know, just watching
Oh, yeah,
that.
they'll
So now
just
you
hang
got,
out.
yeah, yeah.
And see how it goes, because you're doing the hunting for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's to the point that now in this country we have golden eagles.
Yeah.
You know, you have eagles that have kind of figured out, man, that agriculture, that's not, there's a lot more food. Those little, it's
Right.
better than hunting those lemmings up in the far north.
Right.
You know, I don't know how that even works. They migrate somewhat, especially the goldens, but I guess
Right.
some of them, they stay because they're like, wow,
Right.
there's a lot more food in this country than in my home turf. I'm staying. I'm going to raise my chicks here. I'm
Right.
going to stay here. So agriculture, you know, especially this mass agriculture, makes for way more coyotes. You see it instantly trapping. I always said that if you're in really, really rich trapping country, you know, a lot of predators, a lot of little fur bears, you're doing good to catch across the board. I'd say coyotes, coons, and bobcats. You're going to look at, if you're doing everything right, you're going to get 5% catch rate. So if you put out 20 traps
Wow.
per night, you're going to catch one thing. And that's what I've always called it the hinterland. So that's where I live out here, for instance. But that would be places like my dad's. His is probably a little bit artificially high because he's on a river. But that's what you should expect.
Right.
And there's two things going on if you don't get that. You are, or somewhere near that, you know, there's not hardly anything there. Or if you're seeing them there, you're doing something wrong. In agriculture areas, though, it's between 15 and 20%.
Right.
If you're anywhere around a cotton field, a wheat field,
Right.
way more coyotes and way more predators of all kinds.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to think of this country. I mean, they always talk about Teddy Roosevelt coming out in, I think, 1905
Yeah,
and
hunting
hunting
wolves.
with Quanah Parker.
Yep.
And
but you
and-
never heard them talk about coyotes hardly
No.
at all, and they would mention it as somewhat significant. But they're you know, up in Idaho, you see a lot of these videos. Those coyotes are almost completely disappearing because
Really?
those wolves.
Really?
That's, if you think nothing can run faster than a coyote, boy, a wolf sure can, and
Wow.
they hate coyotes. So it's kind of the new trick. You go up there and you don't wolf howl, you coyote howl, and here they come.
Wow.
You know,
I didn't even
pissed
thought
off.
about that.
Yeah, there was a video going around for a while, and it was somewhere in the snow. And there's these two coyotes, and there's no audio. It was just silent, but you know, it depended on the camera. If you don't know the zoom, you can't tell the distance. I would guess the filmer was probably 400 or 500 yards, and you really wouldn't even see them except for the fact it's in the snow, and you can hear. I think they were. I mean, from the setting, they were howling. But there was no audio with it. But you could tell. One of them, he wasn't sitting on his butt, but they do this little yak thing with their mouth, and he or she, whichever one it was, but it was a pair, and they were doing their little song. I don't know, maybe 15, 20 seconds go by. And maybe they'd been at it a while. 15, 20 seconds go by, and all of a sudden these black little dots appear on a snowdrift, you know, maybe
Right.
1,000 yards out, and just start moving down the snow like at a high rate of speed.
Wow.
And probably at a distance of about 200 or 300 yards, they see each other, and those coyotes are like, I mean, whoa, we got to go. And man, those wolves were on
Ran
them,
'em down.
and just blood, even from 500 yards. This
And
one,
snow?
I think it was the second coyote that they grabbed. These two wolves got on each end, and they just ripped
Stretched him.
that thing apart, and you could just see the blood in the snow, even from you know, 400 or 500
Right.
yards.
Right.
And they do the same thing to dogs, you know,
Right.
wolves. They just hate, you know, I guess.
Smaller
I don't know. I don't
animals.
know if it's competition or if
Right.
it's sport or fun. It's probably just for fun. I don't know.
Right.
But, and so that's probably why the pioneers didn't really see a lot of coyotes.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
makes sense.
Because,
Yeah. It's fun. I mean, to watch, you see everybody's seen the night vision coyote hunts and watch them coming in. And, I mean, it's fun sport, fun recreation, but I'm sure you're right that to really lower the numbers, which typically
Yeah,
need to be lowered,
trapping's the only
it's
way.
got to be trapping.
well, and if you do snaring like they do up in the Northeast and in Canada, that's the one thing that they can't ever catch on to. And if you want to kill them literally by the hundreds like they do up there, you know, where one guy will take out 300 to 500. Some of them even do 1,000 in a season. And even traps aren't that effective. You have to do the snares. They have no defense for that. So I always did both. And here, to be fair, I didn't mention it. Those 28 I got, I bet 10 of them were in snares. So when they get trap wise, you know, then you got those. So you kind of have this multi-layered approach.
Right.
I used to just come in calling and shooting. Then they're going to get real wise. And then you go to the traps and they're just like, man, what's this?
Right.
And you're going to get about 60% or more, 70% of them with traps. But those last few that are left are so skittish, you're either going to snare them or you're going to just outright snipe them.
Right.
Otherwise, you're never going to get them because they know something's up. They don't know what's going on.
Right.
They just don't trust anything. Even if you're another coyote, they don't trust you. All they know is something's been, you know, Fred's gone, Mary's gone, you know,
Yep.
everybody's disappearing. And they
Yep.
just don't trust anything. So you just have to outright get their attention, get a bead on them and shoot them from 500, 600 yards, or get those snares. They have no defense against a snare. So
That's
you got to move through the country. So, yeah.
yeah. No, that's interesting. I mean, I suppose. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's really interesting to see how you deal with predators.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but especially if you're raising anything, boy, the benefits are so worth it. So,
Right. Right. Yeah.
yeah.
I suppose you could use a bush plane to travel and
Yeah. Well, if your place is of any size, you could
Right.
use the plane
get
to get
around.
rid of them. Yeah, in Texas, you get an aerial hunting permit and go to it. This ranch that's right off over here, he used to be a big customer of mine, and I would work on his. Oh my goodness, you want to talk about wear guns out?
Really?
Guns that yeah. Oh, 100,000 rounds, easy. He'd put,
Wow.
yeah.
Aerial hunting,
Yeah.
helicopter.
Well, depredation. He didn't do any aerial hunting, but he did.
Yeah.
He did avid, continuous. I mean, dozen times a year aerial hunting of his entire place, and he was doing about 500 plus thousand acres. So, if anybody knows anything about land, they can probably guess who that is.
Right.
And he would, even doing it that much, he would take off probably only 200 or 300 coyotes a year. But it was so funny because I talked to a guy that you know, kind of worked on the place, and he said that, yeah, you won't see any coyotes and you won't see any wild hogs. And that's really what he was after, is to just
Taking off the
eliminate,
hogs.
oh man, eliminate all those feral hogs.
The destruction they're doing to his
And-
ground, and just
Well, they screw with the deer, the quail,
Right,
you
they
know.
do.
I mean, they run every other aspect for most every wildlife.
Yeah.
They're a neat. They are kind of neat in one way, but funny story. I had a guy one time. I don't know if this is true or not. I'm guessing it is, because it's kind of one of those things you don't want to admit. But a guy comes in, and he owned a pretty good ranch down in the canyon, Paladura. And so I knew him. I mean, and I knew about, you know, the ranch and place. But one day, it came up, you know, due to this I was helping this guy put together a shotgun, and he was depredating hogs, but it wasn't from like a helicopter or something.
Right.
But I mean, he was just like avid, like, oh man, these things are so bad. This guy didn't hear that part of the conversation. We have this conversation. He picks up his gun, is a Remington 1100, and we'd set it up for night stuff. And so this guy just comes in, hog hunting. Oh, yeah, because he just caught about that much of it. They have a quick conversation. He leaves, and then this cowboy says, yeah, you know, most people have no idea, but I'm the one that twisted Parks and Wildlife's arm. I got with a ranch down in Central Texas. I brought those wild hogs up here into the Panhandle. And he said, you know, nobody believes me, but you've got me to thank for that. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, is this a joke? And he goes on to tell me the whole story. And he got with the biologists, and they were like, yeah, there's never been anything to really show. And at that time, I was like, who's the biologist? He told me. That was him. I went, first thing I went and Googled it. I'm like, yeah, that's who I thought. I thought that was our biologist. Wow. There's never been any sufficient data, according to A&M here, to prove that the wild hogs have any real detriment on the wildlife. And what an opportunity, you know, for hunting. So I brought them up. I got 500 of them, and they were hand trapped. And I paid a pretty price for them. But I brought them up here in the canyon, and within 10 years, they have spread out, and they are on all these ranches here around Amarillo. And you know, it's just funny. One day, I'm going to tell my grandkids, yep, he said, I tell my grandkids, your grandpa brought them wild hogs. Without me, there'd be no wild hogs in the Texas Panhandle, which is a big place. So he's got nothing to do with these hogs in the eastern part, but
right.
He claims full credit for all these big ranches that have these wild hogs that he brought 500 up back in the 90s.
That's amazing. I mean,
and I'm thinking, oh wow, this isn't a joke. This guy thinks this is a good thing, and he leaves. At this point, someone else. I think they'd actually been there the whole time. This guy's name was Chris. That was sitting there, and he leaves, and Chris looks at me and he goes,
"Wow,
I know some people that would like to know that information."
Absolutely.
And I said, "Do you know how much money? Millions of dollars."
Right.
Those things have cost the local ranchers around here.
Right.
If they could prove that guy,
right,
who claims to have brought the first 500 of them up into the Panhandle, I think you could probably get a crime written up on that. At the very least, a civil lawsuit. I wouldn't be bragging about that if I was you.
I wouldn't either.
And then he's like, he said, you know, and I mean, I'm not going to do a fence. I was wanting them to spread out, so there was no high fence business. Boy, you might. I mean, it's like, boy, if they could catch a recording of you saying that, I'm pretty sure, you know, as stupid as our legal system now, they could probably get you in front of a judge and make you pay something.
I mean, I can't prove it.
Of course, I'm sure the guy would be like, oh, no,
yeah.
I was just kidding. It wasn't,
right.
You know.
Right. I mean, they tell the story, you know, where our ranch is in the Kittaquay Valley, that they used to have a huge peanut business. Now, I guess the peanut market changed somewhat. But I've been told by more than one
of the things that pushed it out.
Hogs.
Yeah.
Hogs.
Well, that valley goes right up into Palo Duro, so that's right where they would have come from.
Absolutely does.
And so this guy was claiming he did all this like back in the 90s, early 90s or something.
Wow. I mean, you know, this is totally anecdotal, but I don't know how far it is from our house down there. We have a stand called the Pond Stand, and it's up from a creek about, I don't know, 300 or 400 yards. Los Linguis Creek runs down through there. And there's quail there, there's mule deer there, there's white-tailed deer there, but you should see it right now. I mean, it looks like you took a bobcat in there and you just had the goal to make holes. I mean, big holes.
Yeah.
Holes bigger than this.
Yeah.
And you know, it's when that time of the season when they're looking for, I don't know, mushrooms or something. But they've done utter destruction all the way around there.
They're really bad.
They are. Right.
I will say though, if you know what you're doing, they're so pretty good to eat. I
haven't done that, and I know you have.
Yeah, that's.
They're flat out fun to run an arrow through.
Oh, I'll bet.
I mean, they really are. They'll run out there 60 years squealing and then just fall over.
I've never really, you know, had had to reach out very far to get one.
Right.
Most of the time, it's a pretty up close game,
Right.
Because I just never had the opportunity in some open country. But one time I saw one off on a sand ridge. I had a rangefinder and I ranged him, and it was 157,
Right.
and it was with that rifle, and he was facing me, and they're just solid black, and it's a challenge shooting a black target with iron sights anyway.
Right.
So, and the lighting really wasn't ideal, but I mean, it's 150 yards. How can you miss?
Right.
And he turned like that, and that bullet struck him, pretty well dead center, but it broke this shoulder going in, and it came out his butt. But he tipped up like in the movies, which I've never seen. Most of the time when you shoot something with this, it's got so much momentum that
Right.
they won't even flinch, especially a deer.
Right.
Or it's like that caribou. I
Right.
mean, he actually flinched pretty good, but that's the bigger they
Decent
are,
size animal.
the harder they take it because they get more of it. So if
Right.
like you shoot a coyote with this thing, I mean, he doesn't even know he's been hit because there's no resistance.
Right.
And that's the thing. And whitetail, real soft, muscled, thin-skinned animal.
Right.
Typically, when you whack a whitetail with it, they'll jump a little bit, but they don't go down
Right.
at all. The bigger they are, though, the faster they go down. Like that caribou went down pretty quick.
Sure did.
I mean, he was down 10 seconds.
Right.
Whitetail may take 15 seconds or so to go down. Coyote, I shot a coyote with it once, and I bet that sucker ran 100 yards before he flipped up. Just shot through both lungs.
Right.
And their ribs are so little, I think they just literally, and the bullet's so slow, they just swim out of the way. But on that hog, he got all of it. And it hit him so hard, and you could hear it. Man, it was loud, the pop.
Wow.
And even on a slow-moving bolt like that. And he tipped up on his butt and laid down on his back. He's about 250 pounds.
Right. That's a
And
big
so,
hog.
yeah. I've never shot one as big as my brothers. They've both, Jordan's killed a couple that were at 300. And
Wow.
this one wasn't that big. It's the biggest one I've ever shot, though. But he was just this big black boar sitting
Right.
150 yards. And yeah, that's pretty fun to.
Right. Right. It's also the fun of Browning cell cameras that when they get a herd or whatever they call them, a group in, and they're all different colors. I mean, you'll have paints and you'll have pink and black. And
Yeah, you've
just all
got
those
more
weird
color
colors.
variation, though, down where you're at than we do up here.
Yeah, there's a lot of color variation.
They're black.
Here.
We pretty well. Yeah.
I think it's
Kind of lends.
Canadian River or something.
Well,
Yeah.
if there's any truth to what this,
Yeah.
if what this guy's saying is true, he's an idiot.
Right.
So
Oh, he is.
if there's any truth to what this idiot's saying,
Right.
then yeah, he brought in just the coal black 500, Razorbacks
Right.
over where you're at, and then also near my parents in East Texas. Yeah, they'll have, the polka dots and the
Right.
whites, and you're
Oh,
just
yeah.
like, yeah, I could see that thing on a farm. I've shot 3 or 4 here on this place, and yeah, they're
Yeah. Well,
Cold black.
they say that a domestic hog turned out to wildlife in 6 weeks, grows that sheath around him, and takes on the characteristics
I've heard that
of a feral hog.
that it only takes 3 generations before they're full blown.
Right. Right.
Wow.
And I think I told you that, it's funny. I've been doing the medicated quail
Which is
feed.
like 18 months.
Right, right. Yeah, well, they reproduce like rats, and it's fun to see the cute little devils. But that a few years ago, somebody had come up with a feed to eliminate them, and
Yeah.
they were taking votes. And down in the Kittiquay Valley, I mean, I think my vote probably didn't matter that much, but I said, nah, I guess let them go, because we have strictly a recreational place,
Yeah.
and it's just something you can do in the other 6 months. If they don't mess with quail too much, they probably do mess with quail. They
If you get enough
mess
of
with
them, they do.
habitat. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're now kind of at the stage where if they can't, we can bait them and get them in, but otherwise you don't see that much of them. And that's about right. I mean, you don't want them doing total, devastation to your ground, but when you want to bait them and whack a few, it's fun.
My dad needs to get on it. I got him one of those thermal things, and I can't afford one, but I mean a nice one.
Right.
And me and Jordan took it out, and just an observer. And I don't like to shoot through them, but my brothers, and they think
Right.
that's the bomb. I prefer, but I really want them. Love those things to find them. And we went out and shot. Well, we went out and probably just within 500 acres, we probably got 5 or 6 shooting opportunities, and
Yeah.
shot a bunch, and killed some.
Yeah.
But just all over.
Right. Well, and it's neat that
Jordan whacked one at 400 yards on
Really?
a dead run,
Wow.
straight away from us. Took his whole back end down with a 223,
Wow.
and that's
Yeah, it's a good
I
shot.
don't care who you are, that's pretty salty shooting. I told him that because he was like, "How far? How far?" He just needed a range, and I had a rangefinder in my hand. And I called it out. I said 400 yards, and I mean, he didn't hesitate. Just boom, and you could hear the bullet going down range, and then I saw the whole back end go down, and then you're just waiting for that pop to come back and echo. And even before you could hear the pop, I was like, "Oh, good hit, man!"
Right.
And
Well, I think it's neat
That's
too that
pretty
you eat
salty.
them. I mean,
Yeah.
and I have not done that yet, but I'd like to.
Yeah.
I'd like to try that.
yeah,
And yeah.
yeah. If you know what you're doing, they're yummy.
Right.
I'm sure there's some that aren't, but
Right. Yeah. I
you can tell by looking at them.
You hear the thing that if they get too old and too big, that maybe I don't know if that's true or not.
It probably is, but we butchered a grain-fed farm pig that was 3 years old, and he was terrible
Really?
for toughness. Yeah. So I'm sure that in
Yeah.
the wild,
Makes sense.
if a farm one that is
Right.
old
Right.
is really, difficult to eat. Now, when we turned him in, now he didn't taste bad, so I don't know about that. And I think there's a lot of things that affect that.
Right.
I'll also say that Jordan killed a 300-pounder, 310, and that was probably one of the best smelling. So size
Right.
and the fact he was a boar,
Right.
it's case to case. I don't think you can go by, if they're over this weight. I've heard guys say over 100 pounds.
Yeah.
I've seen some under 100 pounds that were nasty, and
Yeah.
some over 200 that were absolutely delicious.
I mean,
So
you figure
it's case by
if
case.
somebody's not baiting them with something insanely stupid like kerosene or diesel or something like that, which you hear about people, but if they're eating the same food that deer is, I mean,
Yeah.
I know they may have slightly different appetites,
Yeah.
but it's.
I
why
think
not?
where you'd need to probably worry about them is in the humid climates, which we just can't relate to. If they're living in this dry climate right here,
Yeah.
I've never seen one that wasn't absolutely delicious. But anywhere it's humid,
Right.
besides the fact you got bacteria, that's what keeps all these parasites alive.
Right.
And dead, rotting stuff,
Right.
so where they would tend to scavenge and eat things that we wouldn't, and you got all these other types of wildlife that we just don't.
Right.
So they're more omnivores in those areas, and over here they're strictly herbivores. They don't have a choice really.
Right.
Yeah, humid environments they seem to like, they don't even smell bad around here, but in humid environments, I think they
No.
probably pretty maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, they're interesting animals, not great eyesight, unbelievable noses.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're fun to plunk on. Yeah, I definitely want to try the eating process. I helped a guy take a head off one once. He wanted to have it mounted, and it was a boar. And that sheath, I mean, you can dull some knives.
Oh, yeah.
Working on that thing. Both of us were carving away for quite a while.
Yeah.
And and I've heard, I mean, they say that once they're castrated, they lose that sheath.
Really?
Here in a period of time.
Wow.
Isn't that bizarre? testosterone or something. I mean, whatever their
Yeah.
equivalent of testosterone when their gonads are gone, they
Yeah.
lose it. And they're a heck of a lot easier to hunt if, I would think,
Oh,
if
yeah.
you don't have that sheath. That sheath is a pain in the butt.
They don't bleed.
Right.
It's almost like a self-sealing fuel tank.
Yeah.
I mean, you can drill one through both lungs, and he's dead 10 yards that way, and there's nothing that would indicate that.
Right.
They just soak. They don't drip blood.
Uh-huh.
It is wild.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it is. And such a misunderstanding. I mean, people that are now the goofballs that want to go, after them with knives and stuff like that. To me,
Yeah.
that's a level of insanity that shouldn't even be spoken of, particularly
Yeah.
if they got tusks on them. Why in the world would you ever want to be doing that?
Yeah.
But just to shoot them or bow hunt them, they're a lot of fun.
Yeah.